As our programs get more complex, then our main file becomes larger and harder to maintain. So we don't want to write all the code here. Instead, we want to divide our project into different files, each serving a purpose, similar to how we organize our stuff into different containers. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you how to take this greet function outside of this file and put it into a separate file. Now, this has two benefits. The first benefit is that it's going to make this file a little bit smaller and easier to maintain. The second benefit is that once we have that functionality in a separate file, then we can reuse that file in different projects. So let's go to the project window. We right-click on our project and add a new directory or a new folder. If you're using Xcode, this is called adding a new group. So let's add a new directory. We're going to call this utils, and potentially in this directory, we're going to have different utility files in the future. Okay, now we need to add two files in this directory. One file is called the header file, and that's where we're going to add our function declaration. The other file is called an implementation file, and that's where we're going to add our function definition. So let's do that first. That's easier. First, we add a new file. We're going to call this greet.cpp. Okay, now we go in our main file and grab our function definition and move it right here. Now we have two compilation errors because string and cout are not defined. So on the top, we're going to include iostream, just like how we did in our main file. Okay, now we should also include the std namespace. So using namespace std, again, just like our main file. So no errors here, beautiful. Now we need to add the header file that contains the declaration for this function. So let's right-click this folder, add a new file. We're going to call this greet, so the same name, but with a different extension. Now here we can use H for header or HPP. HPP is more common in C++ projects, but either works. So I'm going to go with HPP. Now we go back to our main file and grab the function declaration and move it into this new file. Okay. Now here we have a compilation error because the string class is not defined, but I'm not going to include iostream here because we don't really need any of the functionality in this file. Instead, we're going to include the string file. That is where the string class is defined. Now we didn't include this earlier because iostream also brings in the string file. Okay. Now we still have an error, so we can fix this by prefixing string with std. Good. So here's our header file where we have our function declaration. Now back to our main file. On the top, after we include files from the standard library, we can also include files from our project. So once again, we're going to use the include directive, but instead of angle brackets, we're going to use double quotes to reference a file in this project. So we're going to go in the utils folder and pick greet.hpp. Okay, so we don't have any errors in this file, but there is a tiny hidden problem here. If we include this file in different files, then we're going to run into build problems. To solve this issue, we go back to our header file and write a bit of code to tell the build tool to include this file only once. Here's how we do it. On the top, we're going to use another directive called if not defined. Then we define a constant, which we type in uppercase letters. We can call this anything. Here I'm going to call this utils underline greet because this is our utility library, and in this library, we're defining a constant called greet. So if this constant is not defined, then using the define directive, we define it. So make sure the spelling is exactly the same. And at the end, we type another directive called end if. Here's what happens. When we build this project, our build tool is going to execute this line. So this constant is not defined. So it's going to get defined, and then this code is going to get included in our build process until we get to end if. The second time we include this header file somewhere else other than main.cpp, our build tool again is going to execute this line, but the second time, this constant is defined. So the rest of this code is not going to get executed, okay? So we're almost done. Now, if you're using Xcode or Visual Studio, everything should work. But in CLion, there is one more step we have to make. If we run the project, we get a build error saying symbols not found for architecture x86. What is going on here? Well, back to our project. Here we have a file called cmakelists.txt. So cmake is our build tool, and this file is a text file that specifies how our project is going to get built. So on the top, we can see the version of cmake required to build this project. Then we have the definition of our project. Next, we can see the version of C++ used in this project, that is version 20. And finally, with add executable, we can see what files are included in the build process. So currently we only have main.cpp, and that's why we get that error. So here we need to include our new greet file. So we go to the utils folder and pick greet.cpp. Again, if you're using Xcode, you don't have to do this step. I don't remember if Visual Studio has this feature or not. I haven't used it or Windows in general for a long time. So if you have any problems, be sure to use our forum. That's forum.codewithmosh.com to post your question. Now, let's run our project. Everything works. Now, let me show you a shortcut before we finish this lesson. So I know that you might be thinking the steps in this lesson were a little bit tedious. We had to create two files, an implementation file and a header file. And in this header file, we had to include all this boilerplate code for defining this constant and whatnot. So there is a shorter and faster way. Here in CLion, we can right-click this folder. And instead of selecting new file, we can select new C++ source file or header file. Most IDEs out there have this feature. So let's see how this works. If we add a new header file, we can call this test or whatever. Now, over here, we can select to add this to targets. That's going to get added in our cmakelist file. I'm going to uncheck that. We don't really need this. But look at what happens when we create this file. So CLion automatically generates this boilerplate code for us. So it defined a constant called hello world test h. Again, the name doesn't really matter. This is just to prevent the same file from being included twice in the build process. So this saves a bit of our time. Now, if we add a new source file, let's call that test.cpp. Now, if we select add to targets, this file gets added in add executable of our cmakelist file. So click OK. Now, look at cmakelists. This new file is included here. But the second time,